Assalamu alaikum everyone. I, I hope all the students are okay. That's pretty good. And I hope that you must have tried to understand and you must have tried to read some more material if required to understand what is stricture. Because in the previous session we had a detailed discussion on that. That's very good. And at the same time, I expect that you people are making your folders, because the folder making is very important by this time, since this is the 13th session, and I'm sure that whatever we have done now, the concepts which are governing phonetics, they are clear to you. I hope that by this time you understand what are consonants and what are vowels. But remember, this is not the complete story. Still, we have to find the new words. All right. So we are in session number 13, and welcome to this session. Welcome to week number 7. Well, dear students, I would like to formally welcome you to session number 13. Of course, we are in the 7th week of our semester, and we are very close to jump in the mid of the semester. All right. So let's see what we are going to talk about today and what we are going to understand today. Well, today we are going to understand the description of speech sounds, especially the consonants. We have done it before, but today we have to do it again. Let's see what is the dimension which has been reserved for today's session. All right? So let's start our session that is based on description of speech sounds, of course, consonants. Well, before we talk about anything else, I would like to refer to session number 11 and of course afterwards session number 12. I still remember I presented before you 5 pieces of information or 5 kinds of information. Do you remember? Yes. But this time you can see the 4. Where is the 5th one? Definitely it shall appear if it is required. And I requested you to understand that the description of a consonant will include 5 kinds of information. Number 1 was the nature of the airstream mechanism. And I tried my level best to make you understand what is the mechanism of airstream inside us when we are producing any sort of sound. And the second thing, we had a discussion, a very detailed discussion with examples to understand what is the state of the glottis if we really going to describe some kind of consonant. And the third thing which I requested you to understand was the position of soft palate, of course, vellum. And then we try to understand that what kind of articulators or what are the articulators involved during the production of certain speech sounds. Yes, exactly. The 5th one is the nature of the stricture. In session number 12, I think so, we had a detailed analysis of what is stricture. We tried to understand the simple meanings of stricture, and then afterwards we tried to understand what is nature, what is the nature, of course, the degrees and the dimensions of stricture. Okay? I hope that you are capable of recalling each and everything. As I told you many a time, that what we need to understand is that we have to connect each and every session. So each session is a chain-like situation, okay? You miss one link, you miss the chain. So please, that's why I am requesting you, do not miss any session, because all the sessions are connected with one another. It's very important to understand, because sometimes I have to refer back to certain other sessions. Maybe it is possible that I am talking to you, this is session number 13, but it is possible that I have to make a reference to session number 1. That's why I requested you to make a folder. And always remember, when you are making some sort of answer or writing some sort of answer, write down the number of the session in which that particular thing or the things or the concepts or the topics were discussed, right? It will enable you to connect each and everything which we have done in the past, and definitely to correlate it with the things which we need to do and which we'll be doing inshallah in the coming days. All right? So the 5 kinds of information: the nature of the airstream mechanism, 2, the state of the glottis, 3, the position of soft palate, 4, the articulators involved, and 5, the nature of the stricture. Okay? My dear honorable students, remember, if we are to describe some of the consonant sounds in terms of the points discussed in the preceding sessions, we shall do that in the following manner. We shall not make any reference to the airstream mechanism, since we have already mentioned that all English sounds are made with the pulmonic aggressive airstream. So that means that we are not going to talk about this again and again, but what you need to understand is that pulmonic aggressive airstream. Pulmonic aggressive airstream. And I made a distinction. Remember that when we speak English, we throw the air outside, we never suck the air inside. And at that time, when I was talking about this pulmonic aggressive airstream, I also made a request to understand that all languages, all human languages are not like that. There are some languages, when we speak them, and all the speakers, when they speak, they suck the air inside. But that's not the case with English language, or maybe some of the languages of Pakistan. Rather, most of the languages of Pakistan, may I say, whatever the languages I know spoken in Pakistan. Again, pulmonic aggressive airstream. That is the point you must remember always. Okay? Is that clear? Good. Now, pulmonic aggressive airstream. This is what I have been emphasizing time and again. For your convenience, it is very important that you read this slide very carefully. Pulmonic initiation. Pulmonic aggressive. That is the most common mechanism. How does it happen? What is the way out? Remember, air comes from lungs, through trachea and larynx, and out mouth or nose. Coming in through lungs, through trachea and larynx, and of course then pipe, and out mouth or nose. That is what we call most common mechanism. For example, if you talk about plosives, stops in English, or all vowels, in front of you there are 6 consonants. Can you see them? Can you pronounce them? I want you to pronounce, say after me. P, B, T, D, K, G. This is for example's sake. There are 6 consonant sounds in front of you, and all vowels are there. All vowels are there. E, I, A, all vowels. How many vowels we have? Yes, we have traditional 20 vowel sounds. 12 pure vowels, 8 diphthongs. At the same time, we have got triphthongs. Now, when I say pulmonic ingressive, it's very rare. This is what I am telling you, that most of the human languages, but there are some languages, when you talk about most of the languages, we call it pulmonic aggressive. But there are some human languages, of course it is written very rare, pulmonic ingressive. Speaking while sucking in. This is what I told you, that some of the African languages, for example, you speak, all the speakers of those languages, they suck the air inside while they are speaking. But most of the human languages, what happens? Pulmonic aggressiveness is there. Absolutely right. Okay? To elaborate pulmonic initiation further, now try to read and understand this slide. Initiation by means of the lungs, actually the diaphragm and ribs. Do you remember when I told you that these are not only the lungs, in fact, because outside the lungs there are certain parts which are helping lungs. For example, the ribs cage, for example, the part of abdomen, that is diaphragm, they are supporting lungs, in fact. This is what that is called pulmonic initiation. So pulmonic initiation takes its origin where? Actually, diaphragm and ribs, they are supporting the lungs. Yes, to pump the air outside, of course, through the windpipe, larynx, and then, of course, certain speech organs are working together to produce certain sounds. Are you getting my point? I repeat, initiation by means of the lungs, actually the diaphragm and ribs, is called pulmonic initiation. So if there is a question about pulmonic initiation in phonetics, so that is the simple answer. Number 2, the airstream which originates in the lungs is called a pulmonic airstream. And since the air flows outward, it is said to be aggressive, outgoing. Outgoing, it is not ingoing, as I told you that many languages, but since we have to focus ourselves on English language, since we are the learners, we are the students of English, and at the same time we are the students of phonetics and phonology, the second point is the airstream which originates in the lungs is called a pulmonic airstream. The airstream which is in fact processed by certain speech organs inside of mouth, and of course starting from the lungs, that is known as pulmonic airstream. And since the air flows outward, it is said to be aggressive, not aggressive, aggressive. Please never call it aggressive. It is outgoing, it is not ingoing. When we speak English language, we never try to suck the air. Alright? Now the third point is, however, the air can also flow inward, in which case we talk of ingressive airstream. But that is not the case so far as English is concerned. This is the case about the languages which are spoken, of course, which are spoken in the world, but remember, it is not the case with English language. When such languages are spoken, that airstream is known as ingressive, because we are sucking the air inside. That is ingoing air. But this time, for example, I am speaking, that is outgoing, and that should be called pulmonic airstream, outgoing. Why? Because this is what? This is aggressive, not aggressive, aggressive. And when the air is sent inside, sucked inside, that is ingressive. Describing consonants. Now, my question, very simple question, what makes one consonant different from another? What is your answer? You can write down when you are free, you can stop and you can start writing. But now, I want you to understand what? I am saying what makes one consonant different from another. Remember, producing a consonant involves making the vocal tract narrower at some location than it usually is. We call this narrowing a constriction. I hope you understand what is constriction. I repeat, what happens when we produce a consonant? What we are doing? In fact, it is what we call involving and making the vocal tract narrower at some location than it usually is. That is called constriction. But which consonant you are pronouncing depends on where in the vocal tract the constriction is. Where is the constriction? That's very important. Whatever the consonant you are producing, we have to determine and we have to find out that where in the vocal tract the constriction is and how narrow it is. Number one, whether there is constriction or not. Number two, whether there is narrowness, yes, of course, or what? Of the speech organs, absolutely right. So it also depends on a few other things, such as whether the vocal folds are vibrating, whether air is flowing through the nose. First, we have to determine whether there is constriction or not, there is some sort of obstruction or not, and how close or how narrow the speech organs are. When we are to describe the sound, of course, the consonant sound, my dear students, we have to understand. Remember, it is constriction. It is all about constriction. But when we say constriction, we have to understand whether there is not or not. There is constriction or not. And then, for example, we have to find out how narrow the one articulator is to the other one or close to other one, or whether there is complete closure or not. And then there are certain other things which matter to remember. For example, all right, if I'm saying, for example, f and v, both are labiodental sounds. But what happens when I produce the sound f? Do I find some sort of vibration or not? And when I produce the sound v, is there any sort of vibration? That means that is the third category we have to determine while describing the consonant. One, the constriction, and then how narrow the speech organs are, the articulators are. And then we have to determine one more thing, whether one sound is voiced or voiceless. That means one is vibrating sound, the other or not. If it is vibrating, that is a voiced sound, and if there is no vibration, we call that is a voiceless sound. Okay. Now I want you to recall something about this slide. We talked about this kind of things in the previous sessions. Do you remember? Yes, exactly. We can reclassify consonants along three major dimensions, right? So there are three dimensions, major dimensions, which are required to classify the consonants. Yes, exactly. These dimensions are the place of articulation, the manner of articulation, and voicing. This is what I was talking during the previous slide. I was saying that, all right, 3 or 4 things we have to consider. First of all, is there any sort of constriction when we are producing a consonant, because we are describing the consonant, in fact. And at the same time, we have to determine whether the articulators are narrow or not. Of course, when I say narrow, they are narrow to one another. All right. And then the third thing, which was very important to understand, which I was commenting on, is that whether the sound is voiced or voiceless. That means whether the vocal folds are vibrating or not. That's very important to understand. So that means there are certain things to be considered to understand. Of course, place of articulation is what I was referring to when I say, all right, constriction is there or not, and how narrow are the articulators to one another, or to each other, maybe. Then I try to make you understand what is the manner of articulation. That is the second dimension which we must remember. And the third, of course, that's very important. So far as the consonant is concerned, why the consonants are voiced, and of course they are voiceless, because we can say that all vowels are voice sounds. So that means the most important part is there, where of course the world of consonants, because we already know all vowels are voiced, but that means we are not using this kind of term or this kind of statement. We don't use about the consonants. We say that some of them are voiced and some of them are voiceless, right? That's why this is the third dimension. This is very important dimension. All right, I'm not saying the manner of articulation or place of articulation, all are very important, and we must have in our mind when we are going to classify on the basis of these major dimensions. All right, I hope that you should be knowing, and we have to refer to these dimensions time and again whenever we talk about any idea or any concept. All right. Now let's try to understand the place of articulation. Remember, the place of articulation dimension specifies wherein the vocal tract the constriction is. We try to understand the constriction when we were talking about stricture. We try to understand what is constriction, and at the same time we try to understand, all right, that is some sort of obstruction. So that is place of articulation dimension. Of course, as I was talking, that there are very important major dimensions to understand, or to try when we try to describe consonants of English. It is very important to understand, first of all, the place of articulation, because it specifies where in the vocal tract the constriction is. Now, vocal tract is very important because I have shown you time and again certain diagrams reflecting vocal tract, and of course what are the things, what are the processes that occur in the vocal tract when we try to produce certain speech sounds. So it's very important to understand, number one, the place of articulation, because this dimension is very significant in the sense because that tells us, all right, this is the part where we can have we are feeling some sort of constriction. Of course, when I say constriction, that is the vocal tract. And that's the important point we never forget, and we should never forget it, right? Now, the second thing is the voicing parameter. Second dimension is the voicing parameter. Remember, the voicing parameter specifies whether the vocal folds are vibrating. Now, if the vocal folds are vibrating, of course, I'm talking about the consonant sounds of English. I'm not talking about the vowel sounds of English, because we know that all vowel sounds of English are voiced sounds. So there is no need to have more analysis about the vocal sounds because they vibrate. We know that because we don't have that sort of constriction. We don't have, in fact, that constriction. There is no obstruction when we produce vowel sounds. And for example, if I say E, you can say there is no obstruction. I, a, oh, u, whatever. The same is the case with the diphthongs of English, or maybe the triphthongs. So we don't have to talk about the vowel sounds because we are just trying to understand the description of consonant sounds. And so far what we learn is that it's places of articulation, because that dimension is very important. That specifies about the constriction. That is the spot, or where is the spot in the vocal tract that we can have that sort of constriction. And the second is the voicing parameter. That is very important to understand because that tells us something about the vocal folds. Yes, the vocal folds, whether they are vibrating or not. And when they are vibrating, we say, oh, these are the voiced sounds. Of course, we have got 15 voiced consonant sounds, and we have got 9 voiceless consonant sounds. That means that that is what we call voicing parameter. Now, the third dimension is called the manner of articulation dimension, and it's essentially everything else. It is essentially everything else. What we talk about in the first two statements. The third one says everything else. First, place of articulation dimension tells us, specifies that where is the constriction in the vocal tract. The voicing parameter tells us whether the sound is vibrating sound or non-vibrating sound. The third one is how narrow the constriction is. Whether air is flowing through the nose and whether the tongue is dropped down on one side. Are you getting my point? That is what we call the manner of articulation dimension. This is, in fact, this dimension tells us how narrow the constriction is. Whether air is flowing through the nose and whether the tongue is dropped down on one side. Isn't it? If, for example, the sound we produce through nasal cavity, so that tells us ma, na, ing, or maybe when we say la, so sides of the tongue, both sides of the tongue align. They are allowing the air to pass exactly. So this is what we have to understand. Okay, the three dimensions, the three dimensions, the three dimensions. Let's try to understand through certain examples. For example, for the sound D, what is the sound we have? D sound, absolutely right. Now let's try to apply three dimensions on the sound D. Yes, we have got one example here in front of you. On your computer, you can see that there is one sound, D. When we apply three dimensions, what is the outcome? Let's apply first of all the first dimension, that is place of articulation. And the answer we get is it is alveolar. Why it is alveolar? Because the narrowing of the vocal tract involves the tongue tip and the alveolar ridge. D. read this statement that if we pick up, for example, the sound D and we apply 3 dimensions, and the first dimension is place of articulation, the answer we are with is alveolar. How is it alveolar? The answer is the narrowing of the vocal tract involves the tongue tip and the alveolar ridge. Now when we get this answer, let's pronounce the sound again and say D. Where is the tongue tip? D. 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 Yes, exactly. And where is it touching? Yes, the alveolar ridge. Yes, it is touching, the tongue tip is touching the alveolar ridge. So the first dimension tells us that this sound, which is D sound, is alveolar sound. Why? Because the tongue tip is touching the alveolar ridge. For example, D, the place of articulation. Now let's apply the second dimension, manner of articulation. And the answer is oral stop. Oral stop. Why it is oral stop? The narrowing is complete. The tongue is completely blocking off airflow through the mouth. There is also no airflow through the nose. It is oral stop. Why? Because we can understand the narrowing is complete. The tongue is completely blocking off airflow through the mouth. Produce the sound D. 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 Right. It is touching the alveolar ridge, but at the same time, when we say manner of articulation, so there is complete narrowing. Why? Because the tongue is completely blocking off airflow through the mouth. Are you getting my point? And at the same time, when we produce the sound D, remember the nasal cavity has got nothing to do. There is also no airflow through the nose. There is absolutely absolutely no airflow through the nose. No airflow through the nose. That's very important to understand. That's why our answer is that it is oral stop. And now let's apply the third dimension. Say D. We've got the answer voiced, that there is vibration. The vocal folds are vibrating. Now say the sound again and feel it. D. You can put your thumb on your Adam's apple and produce the sound D. 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 So the vocal folds are vibrating. So when we apply these 3 dimensions in one sound, we can understand that so far as the place of articulation is concerned, it is alveolar. So far as the manner of articulation is concerned, it is oral stop. And so far as the voicing is concerned, it is a voiced sound. Okay? After place of articulation, let's talk about something of voicing. The vocal folds may be held against each other at just the right tension so that the air flowing past them from the lungs will cause them to vibrate against each other. Now what's happening in fact? When we say this process is called voicing, what does it mean? The vocal folds may be held against each other. That is the first point we must remember. What's happening? That the vocal folds are holding against each other at just the right tension so that the air flowing past them from the lungs may cause, of course, and definitely will cause them to vibrate against each other. In fact, what happens, the vocal folds, the flaps are there, muscles are there, they vibrate against each other, then voicing occurs. That's very important point to remember. And the point is that these are the muscles, in fact. When they are held against each other, they start vibrating, alright? During the process, if there is some sort of vibration, so alright, we call this entire process as the voicing. For example, sounds which are made with vocal fold vibration are said to be voiced. Whatever the sound is, whether it is a consonant sound or a vowel sound. But remember, with the vocal fold vibration, if there is a vocal fold vibration, we call this sound a voice sound. But remember, if there is no vocal fold vibration, that is voiceless sound. Whatever it is. Of course, we already know that all vowel sounds are voiced. So that's why we cannot apply this kind of dimension to vowels. We can only apply this dimension to consonant sounds. Absolutely right. Very good. Let's try to understand this dimension through a different angle. For example, there are several pair of sounds in English which differ only in voicing. That is, the two sounds have identical places and manner of articulation, but one has vocal fold vibration and the other does not. I repeat, there are several pairs of sounds in English which differ only in voicing. That is, the two sounds have identical places and manners of articulation, but one has vocal fold vibration and the other doesn't. So it's very important to understand the two sounds are there. They have got identical places so far as the places of articulation are concerned. They have got identical places so far as the manners of articulation are concerned. All right, same. But what happens that when we produce one sound, there is vibration. But when we produce the other sound, there is no vibration. That's a wonderful thing. The sound th. The word is thigh. Th. Th. Think. Thin. Through. Alright? The sound is th. Thigh. And the sound is the, thy, thou. These are the words you come across in poetry and of course in drama. The, thy, thou are one such pair. So the pair of words, pair of sounds, there are certain sounds at the same time, but I am presenting before you this pair particularly. Right? What are these? These are dental sounds primarily. These are dental sounds produced with the tip of the tongue touching the inside of the upper teeth, th and the. The beauty of these two sounds is that while producing first sound, that is first sound, what happens? Do you find any sort of vocal fold vibration? No, you don't find. You don't feel it. But when you produce the sound the, that, this, those, these, all these words, when we produce with the help of the sound, they are vibrating. I mean, the sound is vibrating. The pair of sounds is there, right? Whereas the first sound, th, when we produce it, of course, both are dental sound. This is what I told you. You are touching the tip of your tongue with the inside of your front two teeth, but you are not producing vibration, or you do not feel any vibration when you produce the sound th. But when you produce the sound the, what happens? There is vibration. Isn't it? Well, I have tried to give the analysis of the first pair of sounds, right? Th and the. Th and the. Now let's have some more. One is voiceless, the other one is voiced, and they are in front of you. You can say after me so that you may be able to understand vibration and no vibration. Yes, exactly. Vocal fold vibration and vocal fold no vibration. For example, the first pair in front of you is P, B. P is voiceless, B is voiced. The second pair is T. It is a voiceless sound. D. It is a voiced sound. The third is k. It is voiceless sound. G. It is voiced sound. The next is f. F is voiceless sound. V. V is voiced sound. Then again we have got the same pair of sounds which we talked in the previous slide. Th. It's a voiceless sound. The. It's a voiced sound. The next is S. It's voiceless. Z. It is voiced. The next is sh. It is voiceless. J. It is voiced. This is j sound. J. J. The next is ch. It is voiceless sound. J. It is voiced sound. I repeat for your convenience, first the voiceless sound, then the voiced. P, V, T, D, K, G, F, V, Th, The, S, Z, Sh, J, Ch, J. But it's important to tell you, for example, when we talk about some other sounds, say for instance we have got her sound, that is the voiceless, because it doesn't have its voiced counterpart, and that's why I told you, I still remember, that it is glottis. It is glottal sound. Glottal sound. Do you remember the state of glottis? Yes, exactly. When I was talking about the state of glottis, I just referred to this sound. So that's why it is written. The other sounds of English do not come in voiced, voiceless pairs. For example, you've got her. It's a voiceless sound because it has no voiced counterpart. That's very important to understand, right? So where the others are concerned, I have provided you with the list of all the voiced and the voiceless category. But remember at the same time that the other English consonants are all voiced. Alright, I have provided you the list. Yes, exactly. The previous slide in fact contains the list, because each sound has got its counterpart. So for as if there is a voiceless sound, there is a voice sound. Then we are left with her sound. As I told you that it doesn't have its counterpart so far as the voicing is concerned, because it doesn't have its counterpart. It is all alone her, and at the same time that is known as the glottal sound. So for the other consonants are concerned, which is very important to understand the rest of the consonants, because other than the list which I have provided you in the previous slide, these are the consonants which are in front of you. One by one I shall produce them, I shall pronounce them, so that you may understand and remember all these consonants are voiced. Okay? The first one is R. Ring, rat, road, rabbit, rise, roses, L, L, L. The next is W, W. The next is Y, Y. Please make sure that this is Y. It is not Y. It is simple Y. Yesterday. Y. Then M, M. Next one is N, and the last one is Ing, Ing. The last three M, N, Ing, they are nasals. All right. But remember, this does not mean that it is physically impossible to say a sound that is exactly like, for example, an N or N, except without vocal fold vibration. N. As I told you that most of the people, some of the people, but not most of the people rather, so far as the British English is concerned, prone to produce some other sounds other than m, n, ing as nasal sounds. Otherwise, in British English we don't have, or may I say that English we have these three sounds are nasal sound m, n, and ing. Okay. One thing is very important to understand before we try to read this particular slide, that what happens, the native speakers, in fact, when they speak English, of course, they never talk about, or maybe it is possible that when they speak they don't have these concepts behind all these sounds, because it's natural to them to learn English as their mother tongue or the first language. Always remember that so far as the learners of some foreign language are concerned, they have to talk about these concepts. And it is possible when you are coming across some native speakers, right, it is possible that whatever you are trying to understand, I'm saying sometimes there is a remote chance, which you are going to read on this slide, that it happens. But it happens when it happens, for example, during your personal life, and you come across any speaker and you have got this kind of rule or the concept in your mind when you are just trying to filter the speech of some native speaker. So do not get confused, right? For example, it is written, it is simply that English has chosen not to use such sounds in its set of distinctive sounds. It is possible, even in English, for one of these sounds to become voiceless under the influence of its neighbors, but this will never change the meaning of the word. Now, what do you mean by the neighbors? When I talk about the neighbors, always remember I'm talking about the neighboring sounds. I hope that when you shall pick up English phonology, we shall be in a better position to understand what I'm saying now. In the connected speech, what happens, the native speakers, they use certain ways that sometimes the concepts which are in our mind, we get confused. But I think so we don't have to get confused, because it is very much written. When it happens, maybe slight, for example, there is a vibration or there is no vibration, what happens? It is because of the influence of the neighboring sound. So the foreign language learning is at the same time very technical matter, in the sense why, because we are not the native speakers of English. That's why it becomes difficult to speak English language the way the native speakers speak. At the same time, for example, if you allow me to correlate this concept, if any foreigner, say for example an Englishman who is interested to learn Urdu as a foreign language, what happens? You can find there are certain sounds of Urdu, despite the fact that he spends, say, more than 10 years or 20 years, what happens that sometimes you find, all right, this is not the sound we speak in Urdu, what he is speaking. What happens, in fact, in our language, quite naturally when we learn English, for instance, when we learn Punjabi, do you think that your parents tell you the rules which govern Urdu language or Punjabi language? No. We start speaking language, we start imitating. That is the association of objects with the words, first of all, and of course depending upon the sounds. This is what is the way, isn't it? If you just refer to your first language, say that is Punjabi language, or maybe that is Sindhi language, or Baluchi or Pashto, whatever it is, what happens, the parents never try to give you the rules of grammar, they never tell you the rules of phonetics. Do they tell you? Do they tell you about phonological rules governing Punjabi or Pashto or Baluchi language or Sindhi language, whatever the speaker is? Same is the case with English language. When the native speakers speak, they don't have the rules and the concepts behind that, because they come across this language without knowing the rules, the way we know Urdu language or any first language, whatever it is. We do not know and we do not run after the rules. And what happens, for example, when we are in grade 6 or 7 or maybe 9 or 10th or maybe we are doing some intermediate courses we have got to do as a compulsory subject, and then we come to know, for example, when we are picking up Urdu, maybe grade 1, when somebody tells you, all right, this is noun, this is ism. When teachers tell, at home children are all the time speaking and all the time they are just using nouns, and I think so parents start with the nouns. Yes, exactly. You can recall, if you have got some young child at your home, maybe your brother, sister, maybe niece or nephew, whosoever he or she is, you can see them very closely when your mother or maybe you or maybe somebody else is speaking Urdu or Punjabi. We never tell this is ism. For example, if we say chair, kursi, do you think that we say first of all this is kursi and that is a noun, ye kursi hai or ye ism hai? We never do this. Same is the case with the native speakers of English. Always remember, they never do this. So sometimes it is possible. I'm taking a bit more time to make the things clear over here, that sometimes the neighboring sound of the vibrating sound, it affects the vibrating sound, it makes it a little bit of voiceless sound. That's why a little bit it is possible we get confused, but a bit. So you don't have to get confused when you come across this sort of situation. All right, good. Well, after having talked about voicing and places of articulation as dimensions, now we have to talk about the third very important dimension, that is manners of articulation. We have had discussion on manners of articulation, definitely by applying different formula, different technique to understand. But this time definitely we have to understand, since we are trying to describe the consonants, and now definitely we have to talk briefly. For example, let's talk about first of all the stops. Remember, a stop consonant completely cuts off the airflow through the mouth. Stops. What does it do? Or what do these stops do? A stop consonant completely cuts off the airflow through the mouth. There is no airflow. Absolute blockage, complete closure. Do you remember these terms? Complete closure. For example, in the consonants t, d and n. For example, in the consonants t, d and n, the tongue tip touches the alveolar ridge and cuts off the airflow at that point. That is the manner of articulation. Airflow is cut where? At that point. Where? While we are producing these three sounds, t, d and n. The tip of the tongue is touching what? The alveolar ridge. And when it touches the alveolar ridge, this is the point where it cuts off the airflow. Right? It cuts off the airflow. You can pronounce these sounds after me and you can feel it. Say after me. T, D, N. Now you can feel the tip of the tongue is touching the alveolar ridge, and that is the point where it is cutting off the airflow. Now in T and D, this means that there is no airflow at all for the duration of the stop. For the duration of the stop, I'm not saying that there is entire blockage, but I'm talking about at that time, duration of the stop, till it is touching that spot. T. When I say T, at that moment, remember the duration. We have to think about the duration. And when I say D, again, airflow at all for the duration of that stop. It is very important to understand. Okay? And then in N, there is no airflow through the mouth. Why? Because this is a nasal sound. But there is still airflow through the nose. Alright? I am saying so far as the third are concerned, that means there is no airflow at all for the duration of the stop. Duration of the stop. Th, d. But when we talk about n sound, there is no airflow through the mouth. And I told you there are sounds which are produced by the use of oral cavity, and there are sounds produced, yes, through the nasal cavity. Yes, exactly, this is nasal sound. That's why in n there is no airflow through the mouth, but there is still airflow through the nose. That's very important to understand. So that's why we call them, or we distinguish, there is a distinction between them. And what is that? Nasal stops. Nasal stops and oral stops. Nasal stops and oral stops. When we talk about n, that is a nasal stop which involves airflow through the nose. N. N. Why? Because the tip of the tongue is touching the alveolar ridge, the back side of the upper front teeth, right? Front teeth, the back side of the front teeth, but it is blocking the air to pass through the oral cavity. Yes, exactly, through the nostrils. In fact, that is the airflow, we can feel it. Through the nose, nasal cavity is there, and then through nose. But so far as the oral stops are concerned, so far as turned, we don't have that very formula. So that means nasal cavity is not used, rather oral cavity is used. Th. No nasal cavities are used. D. No nasal cavities are used, not at all. But in n, what happens that we use nasal cavity. So that's why we distinguish between nasal stops and oral stops. Th, d are oral stops, whereas nasal stop is n. Are you getting my point? Okay. Well, dear students, before ending this session, I hope that you can recall what we have talked today. We try to understand, or we try to describe the speech sounds, definitely the consonant sounds of English, by applying different dimensions, of course, that is voicing, that is place of articulation and manners of articulation. And I hope that this time you are capable of distinguishing certain sounds when we apply the first dimension. For example, may I say the sequence is like this: the voicing, then place of articulation, then manner of articulation. Yes, exactly, time and again we have to try to apply different angles, because so that we may be able to understand what in fact the speech sounds are. At the same time, what happens, I have to take the assistance of certain diagram, so that when I say something or when you read something, what happens, there is some sort of diagrams elaborating or reflecting or reflecting or telling us the certain position of certain speech organs. That's why I'm trying the level best to associate what I say. There must be coordination in between the words and of course the visual effects. What happens sometimes, the visual effects, they work more, and when we say something, if it is amalgamated, blended with some sort of photographs or visual effects such as diagrams, what happens, the things are understood rather more comprehensively. So that is my humble request, that whatever we do during one session, it's very important that you have to correlate with the previous sessions, because understanding, or the full understanding, may I say that, it's generated at the time when we try to correlate each and everything. Okay, so we tried our level best to understand in the beginning, for example, what is voicing, what is place of articulation, what is manner of articulation. I still remember that when we talked about this, maybe it is possible I said that some of the students may get confused. But now it is a time, I am 100% sure, since we are in the middle of the semester, there is no more confusion at all. All right, because in the coming days, when we'll be jumping into the world of phonology of English, we have to get ourselves involved in understanding what is intonation, what is stress, what is word stress, syllable, blah blah blah. That's why before that, it is my humble request that we must try to understand the speech world or the entire phonetics through and its all aspects which are determining, in fact, which are the concepts behind the understanding of phonetics in detail, right? That's why today again there was another way to understand the description of consonants. So I hope that you must have tried to understand fully, and now this is the time to talk about self-assessment. And you know, self-assessment is based on what we have done or what we do during one session. Today the task for you people is that to define what are speech sound by elaborating consonants of English. Today simply you have to define and you have to elaborate English consonants. That is the task you have to do, and after doing that task, please put it in the folder. So thank you very much from my side. Goodbye and good luck. Stay blessed.